My guest today just gave birth to boy-girl twins a little over a month ago, but the road to get here was full of surprises. When she first started trying to conceive, she realized how little she actually knew about her own fertility and ended up learning more from TikTok than from her doctor. Well, her first pregnancy brought the roller coaster of a baby who kept flipping breech to head down and back again, and her more recent pregnancy was surprise twins, with baby A head down and baby B breech, setting the stage for an uncertain delivery. I'm pregnancy focused chiropractor Dr. Elliot Berlin, and you're listening to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. Lauren Gaba Flanagan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I can't believe that you had a toddler. Now you have twins and a toddler, and you're hanging out with me. I feel so lucky.
I'm at my sister's and no kids in sight, so we can actually have a conversation all about my kids.
Amazing. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Where are you from originally, and what do you do for work?
I am born and raised in Los Angeles, have lived here my whole life other than a few years for college. And for work, my background is in brand and creative strategy. Really, what that means is that no matter what industry I'm in, I'm always studying people, human behavior, decision making, where conversations take place, how conversations take place online, have worked in the video game world, in entertainment, in sports, and most recently in politics, but always sort of doing the same set of things in each job.
What did you study before that to get into that?
I studied marketing communications, but always just have been a real culture vulture, and I love people.
Culture vulture is a little hard to say.
Mouthful.
I mean, it is the marketing that you studied. I mean, I assume there's an element of psychology there.
Absolutely. Voter behavior, consumer behavior, what motivates people, why they make decisions about what to buy or who to vote for or what to watch. It's all kind of in the same kind of bracket of just what drives us.
Right. A kind of really interesting application of psychology and what makes us make our decisions. All right. And then your husband, how did you guys meet?
We met at a Christmas party, actually. My mother introduced us, not with the intention of setting us up, but I had just broken up with a boyfriend and she encouraged me to go to a holiday party with her. And we get to the party and she's like, there are a group of guys from the office. You guys are the only people here under the age of 60. You should meet. And she brought me over and I spent the whole night talking to my now husband. And that was probably 12 or 13 years ago.
We've come so far since then.
10 years of marriage, we've come a long way.
So, where along that timeline did you discuss kids? Is it something you always envisioned yourself wanting to do? Is it something you wanted to do sooner or later? And what about him as well?
When we got married, he was older, but I was younger. He was 30, but I didn't feel like I was ready in the slightest. I was in my 20s. I was working really hard, and we had discussed kids, knew we both wanted them, but we just kind of wanted to take our time getting there. And coincidentally, right around the time that we started talking about kids really seriously, we had a trip planned that summer that was sort of going to be our last hurrah. And this was in the spring of 2020.
Oh, I remember that year.
We all know how that story goes. So I think there were probably a lot of people who maybe put their conception journey on pause because of COVID. It was such an uncertain time and didn't feel like the right moment for us to try to conceive. There was too much uncertainty for me personally to feel like I could really navigate that emotionally with I had just started a company. So we kicked the can down the road a little bit, and once we sort of started to emerge from that pause was when we started talking seriously about trying to conceive for the first time.
Okay. And then I kind of teased in the intro that you found some surprises as you started to try and conceive. What did you learn, and what did you learn that you didn't know?
So I think, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on kind of the state of education around reproductive health. I felt very, very ill equipped to try and have a baby, frankly. And I thought it was incredibly simple: have sex, get pregnant, have a baby. And honestly, I was so blissfully unaware of you needed to take ovulation tests, and those were the only windows, in a year where you could get pregnant. And I needed to actually be cycle tracking in a more diligent way. And I learned everything I knew about trying to conceive from women on TikTok.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. But I agree with you. Like the fact that we get out of high school, really, and certainly college, and don't really understand, the system and how it works and what makes you more fertile or less fertile. I think that we are missing the point where like undereducating, and also the number of people who think like, right, it's so easy to get pregnant that one wrong move and I probably will be. And then, you're 30 something and want to get pregnant. It's a big surprise that what mom said was a little bit of an exaggeration.
Exactly.
Did it take a long time?
Not for the first time, no. I think probably 7, 8 months. And I got a positive pregnancy test and felt really good about the pregnancy, which is strange for me because I feel like naturally my baseline instinct is to feel like the boogeyman is right around the corner. And in actuality, I don't know, I got this weird innate feeling that everything was going to work out with this pregnancy and that this baby was going to make it here. And I'm so, so glad to say that I was right. I just felt like real inner peace when I saw that test, which is, again, not my norm.
That's amazing. I mean, it's sort of a blessing to have felt that way, and I guess a bigger blessing that it was correct.
Yes, definitely. And not the same with my second pregnancy.
Okay, we'll get there. But when it comes to the pregnancy, how did pregnancy compare to then what you thought it might be like?
I actually, I think the bar was low because I had, of course, I think you hear so much about the first trimester and how incredibly physically debilitating that can be. And I had certainly many bad days, kind of the trifecta of pregnancy: nausea, vomiting, fatigue, food aversions, all that stuff. And I actually wasn't throwing up, but I was nauseous. I had horrible food aversions. I was exhausted. So definitely was dealing with all of that. But I had more good days than bad in the first trimester, and
That's nice.
which was great, and still, was functional and, in my daily life. And I felt really, really lucky that that was the case.
And then second trimester, the one they call the golden trimester?
Felt awesome.
Golden.
Golden, golden. And the kind of hiccups in my otherwise very quote unquote boring textbook pregnancy, according to my previous OB, which I was again incredibly grateful to be having, became distinctly not boring probably around week 32, 33, 34.
Okay, so now we're in the third trimester. What became a little spicy?
So I went into an appointment and got an ultrasound. And in the ultrasound, the tech mentioned that she was breech. And I had never known anything about breech babies. And the way she said it was more observational. And I just took it like that. I sort of thought it was a factoid about the baby and kind of went on my merry way. And then my next appointment, my doctor, when I went to sit down with her to have my appointment after the scan, she said, by the way, baby still breech. We should talk about scheduling your C-section. And I was like, has there been a mistake? Because I don't remember saying that I wanted to do an elective C-section. And I thought that's what she meant. And she was like, no, 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 we don't deliver babies breech vaginally. The way that we deliver them is via cesarean. So that's why I'm asking. And my jaw hit the floor. I was shocked. I didn't know any of this. And this was all completely new information that I was trying to get my head around.
And this is around 34 weeks into the pregnancy.
Yes.
It's a shocking time to find that out. But also, it's kind of interesting that that was the only option presented to you. Oh, you're breech, let's schedule a C-section. That was the beginning of exploration for you, and you learned a lot and did a lot. Let's take a little break. When we come back, we'll find out how that all turned out. No pun intended. Welcome back. We're talking to Lauren Gaba Flanagan. Okay, so a little help from the ladies on TikTok. You get pregnant, and then you're pretty confident it's going to be a healthy pregnancy, and it is boring right up until the very end when it gets a little spicy. So your ultrasound technician mentions that the baby's breech, and then later the doctor's like, oh yeah, the baby's breech, let's schedule a C-section. Big surprise for you. So what did you do with that news?
So my first response was, okay, what can I do to encourage her to turn? And my OB's response was, well, some babies turn naturally, some don't. Some people seek chiropractic care or spinning babies or other things. You're free to try whatever you like. She did not seem terribly optimistic about
Yeah,
my
it doesn't sound like it. Yeah.
I'll put it like that. And so I love a challenge. And I immediately went out to my mom friends, older kids, younger kids, currently pregnant, asked everybody, okay, I just got this news. Do you know anyone who's had a baby breech vaginally? Do you know anyone who's gone to a chiropractor or done acupuncture or any of these other things I'm reading about? I was referred to you. That's how I first came to your practice. And also, that is how I was exposed to all of your work in the breech universe, which, I found really inspiring and motivating and interesting. And I at least felt like no matter how it all turned out, I had learned a lot. And, really, I think like it really enriched my knowledge about pregnancy and childbirth, and I learned so much along the way. But I got to work. I bought spinning babies. I started seeing you guys. I was really, really motivated to do everything I could. And ultimately, it was up to my daughter whether or not she wanted to turn. But I wanted to at least try to give her the best shot that I could.
Out of curiosity, what did you think of the tools or resources or information you were getting about delivering breech babies vaginally, should the baby have stayed breech?
I knew of a singular provider in a city of 15 million people who was willing to perform a breech vaginal delivery. And I was completely ready to transition my care to him potentially
Oh, wow.
at around 36 weeks pregnant. And I went to see him, and he had certain criteria for the type of breech she needed to be, my fluid levels, etc. And he was going to do an ultrasound on me to make sure that I met the criteria. And he scanned me, and the second he put the probe on my belly, he was like, you don't need me. Your baby's head down.
Oh, okay.
We were ecstatic.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. Switching gears at the very end like that, or being ready to switch gears at the very end like that, and the fact that there's only one doctor, as you say, in a city of 15 million, generally means something to people. Like, why won't anybody else do it? Must be I shouldn't do it. So it was clearly important to you to have a vaginal birth. Why was it that important to you?
Honestly, I had always known that I wanted to preserve the option of having three kids. I wanted somewhere between two and three. And really, I was just trying to avoid the primary C-section, just knowing that it can increase complications in subsequent pregnancies.
So interesting.
So
Yeah.
that was my motivator.
Interesting. Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so then you decide not to switch to that doctor at that time?
So at that point, we thought she was Vertex and ready to rumble. And we saw no need to kind of introduce that level of disruption. And, thought, great, okay, we're a go to at least attempt the vaginal delivery. And I went to my original doctor's office 2 days after that ultrasound and received another ultrasound and immediately was met with, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It looks like she's still breech. Would you like to move forward with scheduling your
Oh my
C-section?"
goodness. I can't imagine what that felt like.
So my husband and I get in the car after this appointment and we are in debrief mode. We are in problem solving mode and we are trying to figure out what happened because in our minds, the most likely scenario was that the ultrasound had been misread by the doctor that we had met with 3 days before.
The breech specialist?
The breech specialist. We thought somehow this was an error that he made, which is in retrospect hysterical, as if he quite literally hundreds, maybe tens of thousands of ultrasound pictures.
From the perspective of positioning for breech, especially that particular doctor. So more likely your baby was flip-flopping, which is not super common at the end of a pregnancy in general, especially the end of a first pregnancy. There's usually one major factor that contributes to that happening. Did you have that factor?
Yep. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but I had too much amniotic fluid. I had polyhydramnios, which I didn't get that official diagnosis until after. I think I was probably 38 and a half weeks when we got that information about my fluid levels. And I don't know if potentially it was discussed and it was just never told to me directly because clearly that was the only explanation for how much she was turning, but I didn't know that.
Right.
And
So did you tell your original doctor that you had been to another doctor and did an ultrasound and the baby was head down? You didn't.
nope, I did not.
You didn't want to ruffle the feathers, I guess.
Exactly.
I mean, at that point, that should have prompted the conversation about, oh, maybe the baby's flip-flopping because you have so much fluid. But just for listeners, a little brief recap here is that babies start to move down in the womb once they run out of space. And the more fluid you have, the more space you have. So whereas normally they start to run out, let's say between 20 and 32 weeks on a first pregnancy, if there's for some reason, like a very generous amount of fluid, that there's more space later in the pregnancy, then they act like they would any other time in the earlier parts of the pregnancy, where they could be in three different positions on the same day, just moving around because they can. So with polyhydramnios, when the fluid's over the normal level, and the range is pretty big to begin with, then it's sometimes you have flip-flopping babies at the very end. It's not the baby's stuck, it's just that they have no real incentive to go head down or stay there. So what was your remedy then? And also, I mean, it sounds like you were just over the border in terms of your fluid levels.
Yes. I was borderline for a while and then it sort of pushed past borderline at the very, very end. But when I found out that she was breech again, I said, okay, I know I'm eligible for an ECV because my fluid levels are good enough. I've done a lot of research on the version procedure. I'd really like to go ahead and get that scheduled and try to do it. And we go ahead, we schedule the ECV. I am admitted, I'm in L&D, I'm in a hospital gown. We're talking about pain control for the procedure. One more time, they want to check baby's position just to make sure that nothing has changed. And sure enough, once again, she is head down.
Blah.
At this point, there's a picture of me getting this information live, and it's hilarious. And at that point, we simply put our regular clothes back on, get back in the car, and drive home after spending all of 12 minutes at Cedars.
Wait a second, that is 39 weeks?
That was 37 and a half.
Oh, you did a 37 and a half. Okay. Did they talk about inducing?
So the conversation about induction was not until a little bit later when my fluid levels pushed a little bit higher.
Okay, so at that point you're towards the border, but still in the normal range.
I think so.
Okay. But I mean, with the fluid being in the 20s, you still have that flight risk of flip-flopping. So sometimes they talk about induction, just like, hey, if the baby's head down now, let's strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah, I think because I was so early, I mean, 37 and a half weeks, levels of early, not truly early, but
But they don't like to induce till 39 unless there's a solid reason for it.
yep, exactly.
Okay. Did the baby stay down?
Well, we have absolutely no idea how much flip-flopping transpired between the ECV gone sideways and my induction. But when I was scanned for one final time just to really make sure we were about to induce a head down baby, she was head down.
All right. And at the induction head down?
And at the induction, head down and was ready to go.
Okay. The induction go well?
Induction went well. It was a very, very long labor. It was 25 hours. And the thing about inductions is that the time slot that you get really, in my experience, determines how your experience is going to be because my first induction with my daughter was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the morning. So I did not sleep the night before the induction and I did not sleep for the 25 hours that I was in labor. So
Wow. That's crazy exhausting.
48 hours, which I think the recovery was punishingly difficult for that reason.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're that exhausted, and now it's like full on mommy mode. It's very depleting. Well, I'm glad the induction went well, at least. I think 25 hours on a first kid is probably typical. I mean, it's not so far out of normal. The first one is, as a doula, you're always like, first time mommy. It's going to be a while. Don't leave my
Yeah,
dinner out.
I mean, as far as at one point during my induction, I was on the legal maximum dosage of Pitocin with no pain control. And still, I mean, to me, the hardest, most painful part of my induction, minus the lack of sleep, was the Foley balloon. I was like, give me the legal maximum dosage of Pitocin over that balloon 10 times out of 10.
Oh, really, the balloon. No bueno.
Yeah, that was really, really painful. Between my two labors, hands down, the most painful part was the Foley balloon of the first induction.
So interesting. I mean, because some women describe it as just like, whatever, like a pelvic exam. And other women describe it like you, like insanely painful. I really don't know what causes the difference on how it's, perceived, how you feel it. But I mean, obviously you're very, very tough. And so for that to be so sensitive for you, there must be a physiological reason for it.
I think there has to be.
Yeah. I know you didn't have a great postpartum. I also want to talk about this most recent pregnancy. If you could do that first postpartum experience differently, what would you do different?
I mean, it's very hard to say because I think the transition from 0 to 1 children is just a fundamentally life altering, soul altering, physiologically altering event. It changes you in every way possible. And I think there was so much wrapped up in, I was saying goodbye to the version of me that was not a mother, the physical recovery from that birth because I hadn't slept, because I had such a long labor, because of the tearing that I had. That was just a very, very difficult physical recovery. We were having issues with latching and breastfeeding, and that was a real journey in and of itself. And so there was a lot layered into that postpartum that I think part of that is just sort of par for the course, first time parent stuff. But I think the second time around, the difference maker really is where the payoff is, how sweet and how fulfilling and how wonderful that is. And you have a really renewed appreciation for the newborn experience. in a way that when you're just sort of trying to, get your head around your new life with your first child, it's hard to be able to step back and say, wow, this is really stuff of life kind of thing.
I mean, thankfully, it wasn't too terrible for you to not want to do it again. So the reward was better than the hard parts. And now your hands are very full. Let's take a little break. When we come back, we'll find out about this most recent pregnancy with twins. Welcome back. We're talking about Lauren Gaba Flanagan, now mother of three. Okay, so pregnant again. How did you find out you were pregnant, and how did you find out it was twins?
I took a home test day of my missed period. And one thing that I learned from TikTok that's maybe wasn't the best habit to pick up was testing for line progression, which is a very known term in the trying to conceive community online. But I was taking pregnancy tests every day to
Oh my
see
goodness.
how much darker the lines were getting, which was really, really silly in retrospect. But I mean, not to say that testing for line progression is silly, but for me, it was not the best decision in terms of my mental well being. But I felt like my lines were not progressing in the way that they had with my first baby. And I was scared and stressed, and it did not get me off on a great foot.
So you test on the day of your missed period, it's positive. I mean, with your first baby, you sort of felt like, yeah, this is it. This is going to last. Did you get that kind of inclination again?
No, definitely not. And kind of a running theme throughout this second pregnancy is just kind of that general fear and uncertainty and how that manifested and how that played out.
But the pregnancy held.
The pregnancy held, and it is obviously incredibly ironic in retrospect that the pregnancy that I felt like was not progressing in terms of HCG actually ended up being double the amount of HCG.
Twinitas.
I had twins.
Yeah, when did you find that out?
I found that out probably around 7 or 8 weeks.
Was your husband with you?
My husband was with me, and people ask us all the time, were you shocked? And the answer is yes, we were incredibly surprised, but I think our response was very much tempered by fear and uncertainty and anxiety because twins carry risks, and those risks start or they can start in the first trimester. You are at higher risk of losing the pregnancy altogether. You have a risk of vanishing twin and losing just one baby. So all of these things were kind of swirling in my mind. I felt like, okay, there's a decent chance that this doesn't end up the way we are hoping, which is with two babies at the end of the line.
So your shock and fear was not like fear of, oh my God, now we're gonna have two. It was like, oh my God, we have two, and now we have two to lose,
Exactly.
and really wanting to hold on to them. How did the pregnancy unfold? How was first trimester with twins?
So, first trimester with twins, I was terrified because I'd heard that it just is physically brutal at the beginning. And I felt very lucky that, again, I think the mental piece for me was much more difficult than the physical piece, interestingly enough. I felt like physically, I was caring for a toddler while exhausted and dealing with nausea and food aversions, but I was okay. I had more good days than bad, just like I did with my first. And I was feeling better physically than I was mentally because I felt like, as you said, there was more to lose, there was more at stake. Every scan, every blood test, I went in with just a tremendous amount of anxiety. And In my first pregnancy and in this one, I had subchorionic hematomas, both of which resolved by the end of the first trimester. But in my first pregnancy, it did not bleed. And in the second pregnancy, it did. And I didn't have significant bleeds like you can have with subchorionic hematomas, but I had weeks and weeks of spotting, which is incredibly scary. If you've been pregnant and you've had spotting, you know how scary that is. So,
I haven't, but I've been told.
yeah, it's tough. And there were just some strange circumstantial things that actually had nothing to do with the pregnancy, but I ended up in the ER on New Year's Eve with norovirus.
Oh,
Had norovirus. I'm so sorry. But there was that. And then, that was New Year's Eve. And shortly thereafter, I mean, within a couple days, a week maybe, the LA fires began, which was an incredibly scary, devastating time, both on a macro level and a micro level for me. On a macro scale, I'm watching my home city. The longest love affair of my life is with Los Angeles, and I'm watching huge swaths of it burn to the ground, and with so many friends who are, losing all of their earthly possessions, plus everything I was hearing and reading was the air quality was so poor. And if you were pregnant or a child under the age of 2, you were the most at risk for adverse health events, et cetera, adverse effects from air pollution. And I was pregnant and had a child under 2 at the time. So an intense time to be
yeah.
pregnant.
Any one of those things that you're discussing seems intense. Being pregnant with twins and having a toddler at home, spotting from subchorionic hematoma, watching the city burn, norovirus. I mean, that's a lot of layers.
Yeah, it was hard.
No, you got past all that, thankfully. And was your second trimester golden again?
My second trimester was great. I was starting to look very pregnant and feel very pregnant, which has always been something in both pregnancies that I've really celebrated and absolutely loved. And I think the biggest differences in that second trimester were how much more intensely pregnant I started to look and feel, because with twins, you're measuring between 7 to 10 weeks ahead on average than, someone who's carrying one baby. Plus, it was a second pregnancy for me. And the second piece was just how much with twins, the medical monitoring starts to ramp up in that second trimester. I was being seen a lot. That's when I started to see an MFM with regularity. That's when I started to see my OBGYN, with relative frequency. So those were kind of the big second trimester takeaways.
Yeah, everything happens a lot sooner. Did you have discussions with your OB about birth? For one thing, they don't generally make it to 40 weeks. And also, a lot of providers don't even entertain vaginal birth for twins. So, what those conversations like?
Yeah, so I had had a perfectly fine experience with my first pregnancy and with my OB, but I felt like when I found out I was having twins, that my first pregnancy was very procedural. It was a process. The pregnancy was a means to the end, a means to the baby. And I really wanted this second pregnancy and birth to feel reflective of kind of the sacredness and the significance of what I was going through. And so I completely reevaluated my care team. And that was one of, if not the biggest difference between my first pregnancy and my second, was who I had supporting me. I really wanted an OB who was going to be a cheerleader for me. And, my husband described my OB as my coach. And it was so accurate. He really felt like he was, my coach of my final Olympic season before I went into retirement.
Wow. I mean, that seems ideal, but hard to come by.
Ideal and hard to come by. It was total serendipity that Dr. Guile came into my life. He was recommended by a friend, and I met him, and I immediately knew he was a fit for me. He is one of the most empathetic providers I've ever worked with or come across in any aspect of my life or my kids' lives in terms of the healthcare providers I've interacted with. He really heard me, and from the very beginning, I never felt like decisions were going to be made without my consent. He treated me as an equal in this process. He wanted my input. He asked me how I felt. He wanted to collaborate with me on the type of experience that I wanted, which I think is just breathtakingly rare. And I think all the time about how common it is. I mean, the research shows, and statistically it shows, women really have to fight to be heard in healthcare settings. The idea of that really, really scared me. And I did not want to have to go into appointments ready to fight and ready to advocate for myself. I desperately wanted a doctor who was going to be that advocate for me and on my behalf. And I got that, in spades with Dr. Guile.
First of all, I'm so happy for you that you found him and were able to have that experience, but also you sold it so well that I kind of want to go see him as my doctor, but I'm probably not going to have any more babies. So, okay. So, in terms of the birth, what did you want and like, how did you set it up?
So I didn't necessarily think that delivering twins vaginally was an option. I'd read and heard a ton of twin birth stories, and I think, only a small handful of them were delivered vaginally. And I knew that the position of the babies was going to be the decision maker on that. And I have some experience with uncertainty in
Positioning.
that position. So I wasn't really thinking in great detail because I also felt like there was so much daylight between where I was in the pregnancy in my second trimester and their birth. I had to get through, whether any potential complications. I had a glucose test to pass. I had, just a lot of hurdles. And I wasn't as focused on their birth as I was about kind of the immediate future of the pregnancy.
That makes sense. There's a lot, a lot of air traffic control going on there. When you did talk about birth and you said position dependent, was Dr. Giles, meaning what was his comfort zone with positioning?
So, generally speaking, I have never heard, unless somebody opts for a home birth, I've never heard of someone being able to attempt a vaginal delivery with twins in a hospital setting if baby A, who is the presenting child, who is the one who is closest to the cervix, if baby A is not head down, I've never heard of someone be able to attempt the vaginal delivery. So baby A had to be head down. And Dr. Giles' comfort level with baby B was anything, essentially. He said, provided that I was comfortable and that I had adequate pain control, etc., he was perfectly fine with attempting a breech extraction with, any combination of positions that baby B could be in. And I had said to him the second we started talking about birth, I said, is this going to end in a C-section? Do I just need to cut to the chase? I don't care. I want them here safely. I'm afraid of a long labor that ends in an emergency. If you think that we should just kind of press skip, I'm fine with that.
What's the opposite of your first pregnancy?
Total opposite of my first pregnancy. And every single time I said that, he said some version of the same thing, which was, what you want has changed and you no longer want the vaginal delivery. I'm more than happy to talk you through what a C-section could look like. But if you still want the vaginal delivery, I really want to encourage you and tell you that it's possible and that you can do it, and that I see no reason why right now we should just skip to a C-section.
I feel like if my high school coach was more positive like that, I could have turned out so differently. All right. Well, I definitely want to leave a little time to see how this birth went. So if it's okay with you, we'll take one more break and we come back, we'll get the rest of the story. All right, so like a month ago, our guest, Lauren Gaba Flanagan, had these twins, and I'm at the edge of my seat to find out how it went. Unlike your first pregnancy, where your doctor was trying to talk you into a C-section because you had a flip-flopping baby, and you were like, no, I'm going to have a vaginal birth. Here you have twins, and you're like, maybe we should just do a C-section. And doctor's like, no, like, no reason not to do a vaginal birth. So it was all position dependent. How did things go in the final weeks?
Yeah, so at 33 weeks, I had a preterm labor scare and ended up in L&D. I got very, very dehydrated. I was feeling very unwell, very nauseous. I was really scared because of how much my energy had fallen off a cliff that that was a sign that I was fully going into labor. And I go into L&D because I was having painful contractions very close together, got sent home. I was 0 centimeters, 0% effaced. There was no progression happening. And I was enormously relieved because, again, I was only 33 weeks. And it took me a few days to kind of recover and hydrate and get back to a better baseline. And, the last few weeks of my pregnancy actually were really lovely and emotional and exciting. And knowing this is probably my last pregnancy, just spent kind of gearing up for their birth. And I had been in prodromal labor for weeks. And that was the biggest difference between my first pregnancy and the second, was that I would walk a block and have full blown contractions, not Braxton Hicks. And that's just kind of the name of the game with a twin pregnancy. And I really felt like I was for sure going to go into labor on my own before I hit, 37, 38 weeks. But as it happens, that is not where we landed. And I got to 36 and change, maybe closer to 36 flat. And Dr. Guile brought up my fluid levels, but on baby B. So with the type of twins that I had, dichorionic, diamniotic twins, each baby has their own placenta and their own amniotic sac. And the amniotic sac on baby boy was totally fine with fluid levels, but on baby girl, it was too high.
Who was presenting?
Presenting was baby boy.
Okay, so the boy, the first baby to come out, baby A, presenting baby, was in a good fluid level and also a good position.
Yes, he was head down at 28 weeks and did not move a single time again.
Good boy.
It was complete opposite. But my daughter, baby B, was flip flopping and in quite literally every single position that a baby can be in the womb. And I was having so many scans that I was seeing
All the
every
different
single
positions.
position.
Wow. Okay. But again, for your birth, as a factor, it was just baby A. So she could be flipping and not really, not like in your first pregnancy where, oh, head down, we could do vaginal birth. Oh, not head down, we have to have a C-section. As an after coming twin, it sounds like Dr. Guile was comfortable attending the birth, where as long as baby A is head down, it doesn't really matter the position of baby B. Were you also comfortable with that?
I was totally comfortable with that. And again, because I so trusted Dr. Guile and his expertise, and I knew that if he said he could do it, he could do it. So I was, confident in my own ability, I think largely because he really instilled so much confidence in me about what I was capable of doing. And I knew no matter what position, as long as baby A was head down, we were good to go.
So the concern was more over the polyhydramnios having fluid exceeding the normal range than the position.
Exactly. So The fluid levels started to rise. And at that point, I mean, I don't think people realize just how much monitoring there is in twin pregnancies, even quote unquote uncomplicated ones like mine. I was seeing Dr. Geil at that point twice a week
Wowie.
and getting ultrasounds every time. So we were tracking the fluid levels really, really closely. And he, at that point, consulted with my MFM, and they arrived at the place of, if she doesn't go into labor before 37 weeks, we should really talk about an induction at 37 weeks. And as much as I didn't want another induction and I wanted to go into labor spontaneously, I had so much trust in their expertise, and I knew they would never recommend something unless it was in my and the baby's express best interest. And so I had a cervical check. I wanted to have a sense of where I was going into an induction, and I was 3 centimeters dilated and 80+% effaced.
Oh,
So my body was ready, and I knew that the induction was going to be shorter, hopefully, and just sort of overall easier on my body because I was so ready at that point.
so you got induced.
Got induced for the fluid levels. Funnily enough, there was probably a record baby boom at Cedars-Sinai that weekend. There were so many babies being born. People were waiting in triage with broken water. I mean, it was packed. They had every room and all the overflow rooms completely packed. So my induction time slot ended up being pushed quite a bit by probably, I think, 12 hours,
Wow.
which is really interesting. But I got into Cedars that morning, got started on Pitocin at about 10:30 a.m.
Got to avoid the balloon.
Got to avoid the balloon because I was so dilated and so effaced.
You didn't need it.
You don't need it. So my doula was there, and she, was very involved in sort of making sure that I was on the ball. I was mentally in a good place. I was, able to kind of work through the contractions that I was having from Pitocin. And a few hours later, probably at about 1:30 or 2, the next logical step to get my contractions stronger and closer together was to break my water. But with polyhydramnios, the recommendation, and with twins, the recommendation is really that you get the epidural prior to your waters being broken. So at that point, I got my epidural at about 2:15-ish, and my water was broken shortly thereafter.
Is it like one break for both sacks?
No, it's one break for one sac.
Baby A.
Baby A, exactly.
Okay.
My water was broken, and it was a really wonderful experience with my epidural. The block was less dense than with my first baby, and I had Lori, my doula, really involved in terms of making sure that I was getting adequate movement, even though I was not obviously up and walking around. But I was able to just sort of nap and meditate and relax and rest for several hours, which was wonderful. And exactly how it was with my first birth, I woke up from this like lovely kind of meditative state, violently nauseous, throwing up, incredibly agitated, very, very uncomfortable, and feeling very upset and just dislocated, which is now I've learned just kind of the way that my body handles transition.
Some kind of hormone surge.
And I didn't want to get my hopes up. I felt exactly how I did with my first, but I did not want to get my hopes up that I was ready to push at that point. But because I was just feeling so uncomfortable, my nurse wisely was like, I think it's time for another cervical check. And I will never forget this as long as I live. My husband and I quote it all the time. The nurse midwife came in, gave me a cervical check, looked me in the eye and said, "Oh, hello, head." So, and I had been feeling the urge to push, but I was in no world. I thought I was maybe like 8 centimeters. In no world did I think that he was crowning.
Oh, wow. Okay, did it take much pushing?
So when you have twins, even if it's not a scheduled C-section, they transition you when you are ready to push into an
Oh, to the OR.
just in case things go sideways and they need to perform emergency surgery. So we were ready to move into the OR, and I was panicking because Dr. Guile wasn't there. And I said, I'm not pushing these babies out unless he is here. Where is he? And they were like, he's running from the parking lot. So Dr. Guile is running through the halls, and we get to the OR. He is there. I'm ecstatic. And I looked around that operating room, and both Dr. Guile and Lori had prepared me. They said the operating room is big and it's busy with twins. And I looked around, and I think there were probably 19 or 20 people in that room.
Wow. That's a lot even for twins. But yeah, they usually have a NICU team for each baby, just in case.
Yep, exactly. And so we got in, I started to push, and I said to Dr. Guile and Lori, I said, I'm not progressing him. He's not moving. My block is still too dense. I know the epidural's off, but I don't know what to do because I'm pushing and he is not moving. And Lori said, look me in the eye, reach down and feel your son. And I reached down and I felt his hair and his head. And that was like an adrenaline shot to the heart. I couldn't believe he was that close. And Dr. Guile said, trust me, you are progressing him. This baby is moving. And my recorded pushing time when I checked my notes for this podcast was 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. What took so long? Okay. Well, that's cool. And it's got to be weird to have one baby out and one baby still in.
Yeah, so he came out, and I knew that my daughter, baby B, was probably in a funky position. And Dr. Guile confirmed that for us, that she, at the time she was delivered, was double footling breech.
Oh, wow. Both
And
feet down on the cervix. Did that water break or did you have to break it?
it was manually broken. And he performed the love set maneuver, I believe it's called. You definitely know more about this than I do, but to get her into a better position in my uterus, he was able to kind of manipulate her body a little bit and performed these two maneuvers that both have names according to my labor and delivery notes. But he was able, I mean, she came out by her ankles. Like, it was, the photographs are unbelievable. Like, it is absolutely wild. And it was very emotional for me because I got to have a vaginal breech birth, which I had been on this journey since my first baby. And there were several residents and students in the room observing my birth, and they got to see vaginal twins delivered, and they got to see a vaginal breech delivery, which is incredibly rare. And I just felt so emotional and, felt like it was such a special experience to be able to do that and to share that experience with people who do this every day but don't see this every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And without the training, especially the residents, without the training, it's very hard for them to be able to carry the torch and offer that type of delivery to others down the road, since it's not that common. So even if you have a resident who's intellectually curious, wants to learn everything, wants to be able to keep all the options on the table, unless you get to see enough of them and do enough of them, you don't really get the confidence to be able to do them safely. And so when someone like you comes along who's open to sharing, you really contribute to that and make it possible for others to have the options as well.
That's exactly how I felt. And interestingly, I had been seriously considering midwifery care for this pregnancy prior to finding out it was twins, to be
Ah,
clear.
yeah.
But I ended up leaving this pregnancy with a completely different perspective on medicine, which is really interesting. I interfaced with the healthcare system more in this pregnancy than I ever have in my life. And it was really, really beautiful. I mean, there was a nurse in the room with my twins who was the sole nurse in the room when I delivered my daughter,
Oh,
my
wow.
older daughter. And, I am so grateful for many reasons. I mean, we can talk about the delivery of the placenta and kind of what happened subsequently, but just my gratitude for the hospital setting and the situation that I was in and the team that I had around me was significant.
All right. So you teased the placenta. What happened?
So, because of the type of twins that I had were dichorionic and diamniotic, they each had their own placenta. So, the expectation is you deliver both babies and then you deliver both placentas after. However, I only delivered one placenta. And the reason for that is because at some point in my pregnancy, the placentas had fused and we did not know that,
Oh, wow.
which is really interesting because I had so much imaging done, obviously, and still we did not know this. And I ended up being really grateful that I delivered when I did because with boy girl twins, it's common for the boy to be bigger, and he was for the vast majority of my pregnancy. And at a certain point, she started to pull ahead and he started growing less. And he was not technically growth restricted at that point, but we think in retrospect, probably because of the fusion of the placentas, he would have ended up more severely growth restricted had I gone another 2 weeks, which I, theoretically could have because I delivered at 37 weeks.
Wow. That's the first time I've heard that.
Really?
Yeah, of the placentas fusing.
It was pretty cool. I mean, we have tons of pictures of it, and it is so large. But yeah, once the placenta was delivered, I started hemorrhaging, which was, again, so expertly managed. I think a lot about women in other parts of the country and the world who die from postpartum hemorrhage every day. It's the leading cause of maternal mortality. And it was a footnote in my delivery. And I think about all the women for whom, in my situation, easily could have lost their life because I was very high risk for a hemorrhage due to both the twins and the polyhydramnios, both of which hyperextend your uterus beyond its normal capacity. And I started to hemorrhage and immediately got the fundal massage. I received an intramuscular injection in my thigh of a medication that's used to control blood loss. I was receiving intravenous medication, and I was on a pill for the duration of my hospital stay to further control the bleeding. Without aggressive medical intervention, that part of my story could have ended so differently. And, I still lost almost a liter of blood, but I felt great. I left the hospital with great labs. And, to Dr. Giles' credit, I never felt scared. He never changed the tenor of the room. He didn't alarm me. He had warned me how this would go if I were to hemorrhage and how he would handle it. And so once I heard him start to call the medications in, I was like, okay, that's what's happening, but I was prepared for this. And he managed it so expertly that I walked out of there with great labs, with, no birth trauma, which I know is, I just feel incredibly grateful.
Well, I am incredibly grateful that everything turned out well for you and that you came to share your story. There's so many kind of interesting things that happened from fertility to your first pregnancy and birth, and then the twin pregnancy and birth. This episode is definitely full of information that you don't get to hear firsthand very often. So thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love hearing birth stories. and I've loved sharing mine.
Uh, Thank you again. And at home, thanks for listening to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. For more pregnancy and parenting information just like this, visit us online at informedpregnancy.com.
Doctor, doctor, give me the news. I got a